Ceann Comhairle. I'd like to start, as my maiden speech, by thanking most sincerely the people of Wexford, 11,849 of them, who voted for me, first preference or otherwise. I want to thank my campaign team, an admiration of which I have for each and every one of them. They came out to canvass in their hundreds, and in most cases after a long day's work, which was a big honour for me. So I hope, having attained a seat in this, the 33rd Dáil, is in turn testament to their hard work and their belief in me. Being elected by the people of Wexford as the first independent female candidate to take a seat, and only the second woman after Avril Doyle to hold a seat in the constituency, in itself represents change. I intend to execute that mandate for change in full. The quest for change saw Sinn Féin and independents garner 40% of the first preference vote in Wexford. This was reflected across Ireland. The national media and the government were shocked. Why did people vote for change? Since 2007, many people's lives have changed immeasurably, and though they have been continually lectured by government on the huge strides that have been made in mending the public finances and saving them from oblivion, to many, their lifestyles remain where they were in 2011. Rent spiralling, negative equity, high taxes, unaffordable childcare, free GP care with no GP, no mental health services, no mortgages, no homes. Yes, they had expectations. The recession wouldn't last forever, that the wage cuts were necessary, the increased taxes were temporary, the bank rescue and the Troika were the only show in town. There was no way out. NAMA was to save the day. Socialism for banks, vulture and cuckoo funds, but capitalism for everybody else has been the reality. These entities prosper in an environment of low, or in many cases, no taxes, whilst all the time the middle-income Ireland are screwed. The reason they voted for change is because they now realise that corporate Ireland prospered on the backs of the ordinary Joe and Mary. An expectation to own their own home, shattered by the reality that the home offering will be an apartment or a duplex-style unit in a high-density development in rural constituencies like Wexford, that they neither want nor can afford. This is why people voted for change. If the economy is stronger and employment levels so high, how could things be so bad? Why are there no houses? Why are rents at an all-time high? Why are there long hospital waiting lists? Why are farmers on the breadline? Why are fishermen destitute? Why can parents not afford to send their children to college? Why are children in their 30s living with their parents? The answer lies in the fact that the politicians have failed to deal with solutions that do not accommodate their view of the optics. The answer lies in the fact, for example, NAMA was initially sold to the public as a system that would warehouse loans and ease the crash. But instead, this changed midstream, and those loans were sold to vulture funds, resulting in the utter collapse and devastation of the housing market in Ireland. The main advisor to government on these loan sales ended up being the main purchaser of the loans. The one decision to sell Irish loans to international funds had the following effects. It collapsed the Irish home building industry. It created home rental crisis, created negative equity for the majority of homeowners in Ireland, and created the greatest homeless crisis in the history of the state. Somebody had to be blamed for bust, and builders were an easy target. NAMA pursued them with vigour. Meanwhile, the banks and corporate Ireland got a bailout. When the government realised that there was nobody left to build houses and that the skilled workforce had left for greener pastures, never to return, they had to employ new policies to cover their mistakes. Whatever did they do? They introduced tax breaks for cuckoo funds to purchase properties. They introduced ministerial guidelines to up densities to bring volumes to the market faster, albeit that they were advised that this was not viable outside of the M50. They never meaningfully consulted the building industry. Whatever the spin doctors say about builders, and they may have been part of the collapse, as were government and government agencies, the main cause of the collapse was the oversupply of credit, presided over by a regulator who could only be described as asleep at the wheel. Builders are part of the solution. They are the people who will build the houses. They need to be brought inside the circle. Politicians and civil servants alike need to listen to them. The main people now facilitating the building of properties are the cuckoo funds, who, as we know, pay no taxes. But the optics are that we're building, and we will never be able to break free of this rental limbo that this government has put us in, nor will the affordability crisis ever be over unless we change how we do things. That means taking real divisive action that works. Optics is not what it's about. The lesson I hope has been learned. Change means policies that work. It means strong leadership, standing up and being counted when faced with officials that won't listen. In Wexford, people earning the average industrial wage can't purchase the average three-bed property being sold on the market without the site costs included for €230,000 because they only qualify for a mortgage of €170,000. Change means looking at and introducing current macro-prudential rules, not applying rules completely of another era. Can we consider a mortgage interest rate cap? Banks, as we hear every day, are making excessive profits. Can we simply legislate to equate multiples of borrowing to the current interest rates, not 10-year-old interest rates? Not forgetting that for every new bill the government takes 33% in taxes, but yet Irish Water doesn't have a guaranteed funding structure. Minister Murphy refusing to change the ministerial guidelines to accommodate the housing requirements of rural areas, something being endorsed by the planning regulator Niall Cousins, or vice versa, all of which require change if we were ever to truly go forward to solve the housing crisis. Change most definitely meant that the people did not want the pension age to rise to 67. It should remain at 65. Most of all, we need to recognise that Ireland is not Dublin, and life does exist outside the M50. Whilst the voters recognise this, it appears the government of the day did not, introducing Dublin-centric policies that devastated the very essence of rural towns and villages. Motorways being provided to go only one way, you would think. That is, if you were to examine the IDA policy, particularly in relation to my constituency in Wexford. Only 3 visits to Wexford in 2019, but 269 visits to Dublin. Legislation being introduced, such as zero-tolerance drink driving laws, that were overbearing and ill thought out when implemented in rural Ireland, serving only to devastate rural areas and businesses, creating social isolation, when all was required was a rural transport infrastructure, because in urban areas there are buses and taxis on every street. Rural Ireland depends on rural industries, farming, fishing, haulage and tourism. With too many businesses such as tourism operating on a seasonal basis, they do not have the footfall of urban businesses. That's why the VAT increase should never have been applied across the board in the hospitality sector. It should have been a city tax. This is a prime example of the urban-rural disconnect. In farming and haulage, the lack of labour, the green agenda, the over-regulation, all serving to erode the bottom line and making many small holdings and businesses that raised families in the past now non-viable. At this time, the EU budget is being discussed, And due to Brexit, the budget is reduced, which means that in turn the farming cap budget is being revised and reduced. It's time we stated our case for the farmers and the hauliers. We as a country are not just geographically disadvantaged but also competitively as a result of Brexit. We should call on the EU to now institute the support they promised so vocally in the hope that they might overturn Brexit, or was that more optics? Rosslare Europort must be upgraded to its operational potential, and we have to start to walk the walk if we are ever to alleviate the congestion in Dublin Port. That very congestion that causes the increase in carbon emissions, the very thing we are being penalised for through carbon taxes. When a haulier's productivity is halved due to congestion and the lack of space, they are being asked to pay more. Why is it impossible to join the dots and see the benefits of change? One last paragraph, please, Count Corla. All of this is currently happening without resolve, and then wham, the coronavirus hits us. What can we do? What can the government do? Take the lead. We must display truth and transparency in how this process will work. And are we prepared, yes or no? As leaders, the burden is on government to make clear decisions to close schools, cancel large mass gatherings, and don't assume that your message is being heard. I have one question for the Minister, Ceann Comhairle, and that is, in the event that any of the main parties can agree a formation of government, in the cases of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, the Greens or Sinn Féin, would all need to have a special delegate conference convened in which to allow their members approve the programme for government? Just one thing, Ceann Comhairle. Has due consideration been given to a contingency plan so as not to give the country the excuse of the coronavirus for forming a government?
Thanks to God for mentioning the coronavirus at the end. Anyway, thank you, Deputy.